So our readings today continue the Easter theme of what it means to be the community of Christ, both in who is welcome and then how does one live that out. We hear an example again of choosing not to withhold the waters of baptism. Last week, it involved an Ethiopian eunuch, and today it involves Peter and the Gentiles. And Peter asks a question that really isn't a question. Can anyone withhold the water for baptizing these people who have received the Holy Spirit just as we have? Of course, the answer is no, that water cannot be withheld. It belongs to all who claim Jesus as their way to understanding what it means to abide in the love of God. And that leads us to John's Gospel. Now, I want to remind you of the setting of John's Gospel. It is the Last Supper. But John's Gospel greatly expands on what is present in the other three Gospels. Rather than focusing on this is my body and this is my blood, the scene begins with Jesus taking up basin and towel and washing his disciples' feet. Controversial. And he does so to demonstrate that he is calling us into service, not as someone who lords over others, but rather this is the way we care for one another, serving one another. And that's reflected again in the moment when he says, I call you servants no longer. You are with me in all of this, fully abiding in God's love. And that's where we get today, abiding in God's love, to the pinnacle commandment of John's Gospel, love one another as I have loved you. This is a love that gives life. This is a love that nurtures. This is a love that values not the acquiring, but the being, and lives into the vision of what God desires for the world. It's this type of love that leads Jesus to the cross, but is not substitutionary sacrifice. Now you say, what is that? Well, let me explain it. This is something that came along about 1,000 years after Jesus lived, and it was the idea that Jesus was the necessary payment for human sin. This could not be farther from the truth of what Jesus of Nazareth did. Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan write that dying for someone and sacrifice means for that person's sake or benefit. A parent risks her life and dies in order to save her child from a burning house. A soldier leaps on a grenade in order to save the lives of his buddies. One might say the mother and the soldier died instead of the child and the buddies, but one wouldn't mean as a substitute. Rather, they gave up their lives for the sake of others. They died that others might live. Thinking about 3 20th century martyrs makes the same point. Archbishop Oscar Romero, advocate of the poor and critic of the ruling class in El Salvador, killed by assassins sent by the powerful, died because his love for the Salvadorian people. In this sense, he died for them. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, executed because of his involvement in a plot to overthrow Hitler, died because of his love for the German people and those they victimized. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed because of his love for his people and his passion for a different kind of world. In these examples, dying for others does not mean dying in their place. Rather, these martyrs died because of their love for their people and their passion for a different kind of life for their people. Love and passion led them to their deaths. Their deaths were an epiphany of the depth of their love and passion. Marcus Borg, John Dominic Crossan, the first Paul. Jesus loved in this way and invites us to as well. He led his life He lived his life, which led him to the cross. And then the Romans killed him. He was willing to die for the sake of others for a new vision of what God hoped for. This is not a sacrifice for the end of time to pay human sin, but rather it is for the vision of what God hopes for all of us. Jesus loved in that way and invites us to as well. Now, I am very aware that today is Mother's Day. And it's not, how do I say this? Mother's Day is not actually a liturgical holiday of the Episcopal Church. It is not officially celebrated in the Episcopal Church. So that love one another as I have loved you is not a setup for Mother's Day. Mother's Day falls where it does, and this passage sounds great for some appreciation of our mothers and does reflect the love of some mothers in their lives and the way they live their lives. But I want to stress that they're not officially connected to one another. And I also want to stress that while Mother's Day isn't an official holiday of the Episcopal Church, it's not what some would say is a hallmark holiday. At least it wasn't in its intent. The history of Mother's Day is actually quite fascinating. I found the story of its beginnings on Wikipedia, a place where we go now to find subject to beginnings, and whose main source was a PhD dissertation by Catherine Lane Antolini in 2009 called Memorializing Motherhood, Anna Jarvis and the Struggle for Control of Mother's Day. Anne Rivas Jarvis was a social activist and founder of Mother's Day work clubs. As a woman defined by her faith, she was very active with the Andrews Methodist Episcopal Church community in Grafton, West Virginia. It was during one of her Sunday school lessons in 1876 that her daughter, Anna Jarvis, allegedly found her inspiration for Mother's Day, as Anne closed her lesson with a prayer, saying, "I hope and pray that someone sometime will found a memorial Mother's Day commemorating her for the matchless service she renders to humanity in every field of life. She is entitled to it." So on May 10th, 1908, 3 years after her mother's death, Jarvis held a memorial ceremony to honor her mother and all mothers at Andrews Methodist Episcopal Church. Today, the International Mother's Day in Grafton, West Virginia, marking the first official observance of Mother's Day. Jarvis did not attend the service, but she sent a telegram that described the significance of the day, as well as 500 white carnations for all who attended the service. As she spoke in Philadelphia at the Wanamaker Store Auditorium, she moved her audience with the power of her speech. Although the national proclamation represented a public validation of her efforts, Jarvis always believed herself to be the leader of the commemorative day and therefore maintained her established belief in the sentimental significance of the day to honor all mothers and motherhood. Jarvis valued the symbolism of such tangible items as the white carnation emblem, which she described as its whiteness is to symbolize the truth, purity, and broad charity of mother love, its fragrance, her memory, and her prayers. The carnation does not drop its petals, but hugs them to its heart as it dies, and so too, mothers hug their children to their hearts, their mother love never dying. When I selected this flower, I was remembering my mother's bed of white pinks. Jarvis frequently referred to her mother's memory during her efforts to maintain the sentimental heart of the day, while also maintaining her own role as the founder of the holiday. In addition to her efforts to maintain her position and recognize as the holiday's founder, Jarvis struggles against the forces of commercialization that overwhelmed her initial message. Although some of these forces were confection, among some of those forces were confection, floral, and greeting card industry. The symbols that she had valued for their sentimentality, such as the white carnation, easily became commodified and commercialized. By the 1920s, as the floral industry continued its increasing prices of white carnations and then introduced red carnations to meet the demand of the flower, Anna Jarvis's original symbols became more reappropriated, such as the red carnation representing living mothers and the white carnation honoring deceased mothers. And she attempted to counter these commercial forces in various ways. However, her efforts to hold on to the original meaning of the day led to her own economic hardship. While others profited from the day, Jarvis did not. In 1943, she began organizing a petition to rescind Mother's Day. However, these efforts were halted when she was placed in the Marshall Square Sanitarium in Westchester, Pennsylvania. People actually connected with the floral and greeting card industries paid the bills to keep her in the sanitarium. Complicated realities of Jarvis's relationship to the direction of Mother's Day also speaks to me towards deeper challenges of the Mother's Day reality beyond commercialism. You see, clergy always are in this quandary. I said at the beginning that Mother's Day is not officially, part of church liturgics, but who do you think brings most of their families to church? I mean, who sets the traditions of church-going families? It's often mom. And furthermore, Mother's Day represents some real complicated issues. Yes, Mother's Day may be a joy for certain people who fondly think of their mothers or their relationship with their mothers, but consider those who have lost their mothers, those who are estranged from their mothers, those who never knew their mothers, and those who wished to be mothers and never were. Perhaps most profoundly, mothers on Mother's Day who have outlived their children. Now, I'll be making some phone calls after the service to my mom, and Darlene's mom, and other people who are mothers in our collective lives. And I hope that will be mostly joyful moments. But as far as church goes, I think it's important to acknowledge how hard this day is for some. And the best illustration that I have come across is a prayer by the Lutheran pastor, David Hansen. And this is his prayer for Mother's Day. And it starts with a descriptor. Mother's Day is a day of joy for others and a day of grief for others. For many, it lives in the complicated space where these two emotions meet. This prayer invites into the complexity of the day. This Mother's Day, give thanks to loving, wonderful mothers who have given their children so many invaluable gifts. Give thanks for new mothers welcoming new life into the world. Give thanks for those who choose their children, for adoptive and foster parents who model the adoptive love of God. Give thanks for aunts and godmothers and neighbors who share maternal love with so many children, and for far too often overlooked stepmothers. Give thanks for those who choose to remain without biological children, sharing love with the world in many ways. Pray for the many mothers who have had to bear the unimaginable burden of bearing a child, and those who have borne the silent grief of stillbirth or miscarriage. Pray for those who struggle with infertility, whose desire for a child is met with frustration. Pray for the mothers of children with special needs and chronic illness, who know anxiety and exhaustion better than most. Pray for those who are given abuse and heartbreak by the ones called to love them. Pray for mothers who have made the difficult and loving decision to entrust a child to adoptive parents. Pray for those whose mothers have died, who on this day celebrate and grieve their mother in her absence. Amen.